Okay, so our agenda varies from meeting to meeting. I have fun moving things around on it. So I'll just do a few little announcements and then we'll go right into our I forgot to change it. Okay. It's the same person though. I changed it elsewhere. So ignore the feature title, it's wrong. Then we'll have a break and go back to branch reports and announcements. And if we have time, we'll do a little brick wall work on someone's problem. Okay?
Which one?
So, I'm going to start with first-time attendees. Is there anybody here, it's your first time at the branch? Oh, or, very good. I'll start with the closest gal. Now, this is not to embarrass you. This is to see if you got a cousin in the audience, okay? So if you'd stand and give us your name and then the surnames you're researching. And they don't have to be Durham region surnames.
Sorry. So
Okay.
my name is Michelle Vibert by marriage. My maiden name is Lord. We're the Lord family, so Port Hope and Toronto area. On my mother's side, so the names are Ware, Cook, Challenger, Bateman, White, Liddell, and Burford. On my father's side, it's Lord, Hall, Virgin, Goros, Baker, Fisher, Palmer's from Oshawa, and that's what I'm really searching now. Staples, Brooker, and Stills.
Thank you. And the lady in the red top?
I am not researching any name. I saw in the paper that you had letters tonight from a World War I veteran. I'm a ladies auxiliary member from the Experts Legion, but I have moved to Oshawa. I just lived down the road and I walked out. I'm also Oshawa's representative for the Durham Environmental Advisory Committee. My last name is Leighton. My mother's surname is Lehman. We have Solomon's here in Oshawa, St. Pierre's, and I don't know much else, but thank you for letting me come.
But Leighton isn't Jack Leighton.
Leighton as it, yes.
As in Jack Leighton.
Okay, someone else.
My name is Margaret Kindry, and I'm doing a research on my husband's family tree, which is Kindry and Winkworth. And I'm also doing one on my own, and it's for Long Rock. I think that's it.
Okay.
So I've got part way through, but you never know what you'll find. We found a cemetery named after my husband's name, and another cemetery named after him. School named after him, so you never know what you'll find.
Okay. And madam at the back.
Actually, I came last time just to research, so my name is in the group. I'm that new. My last name is Cann, C-A-N-N. My maiden name is C-A-N-N. And we are at the end of that. It is no more going forward. And so I'm not sure whether I'm going to pursue this or not, but it's Durham region.
Okay. This is the guy to talk to. Right here, this guy, put your hand up, Steve.
Oh, yeah.
Steve helps with the research. And Steve is basically the research team. And if he doesn't know, he has ideas where to look further, okay? At the back, we have a sheet that if you would put your name and the surnames you're researching, if we can match up with somebody, we will. Just a little reminder of the various options there are for parking around here because we may have some new members. We prefer to keep the actual church parking lot for those with the accessibility signs, which everybody else calls handicap signs, except the government. If you're trying to find out where to apply for one, don't look under handicapped. And the side streets around here, and about a block and a half down, there is another parking lot, and that street along there, Roslyn Road, is quite nicely lit at night. So it's actually almost better than the side streets. Okay, so in 2 nights, OGS has got a webinar. You can get to it on the front page of the OGS website. And if it's not there, it's under education. You do not have to be a member to get to the webinar. And Megs Golden, she's actually a southern US gal, but she lives in Ottawa now. And so she's going to talk to us about DNA databases, who runs them, looking at the terms of service, and how to use them in your research. And DNA is quite a hot topic, and you get your results and you go, well, what do I do now? And hopefully she'll be addressing some of that. And don't forget OGS's a yearly conference, Vision 2020, Finding the Past, Moving into the Future, and it's June 5 to 7 this year at the Hamilton Convention Center. The registration is open now, so you can go on and register for the conference, and they have links to the hotel as well, which is connected to the conference. And here's the proper, I think battery's going on this. Here is the proper title of Jennifer's talk. Now, Jennifer Weymark is an archivist down at the Oshawa Museums and Archives. I'm not sure if that's officially in the title, but it's not anymore. But she is the go-to gal down there for knowing what they have in their collection. And she's going to talk tonight about letters from the trenches, Oshawa's World War I soldiers.
You got the arrows. Okay. And I am shorter. So good evening, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Jennifer Weymark, and I am the archivist at the Oshawa Museum. I have been with the museum since 1999 and in the role of archivist since 2000. So yes, this is 20 years in that role this year. This week has been, I know it's only Tuesday, but it's been very busy. I was out giving a talk on Sunday looking at early Black history in the area. I was out all day today at a local high school going over primary sources. What are they? Because the grade 10s need to know that. I'm here tonight. Tomorrow I'm giving a bus tour with journalism students, and then Thursday I am back out at a high school doing a primary source workshop. So by about Thursday night I'm going to be really tired of hearing my own voice. So haven't hit that place yet, so woohoo! Tonight what I'm going to do is talk to you a little bit about Oshawa's World War I soldiers. We're going to learn about them from the point of view of a gentleman by the name of Private William Garrow Jr. In 1995, the Oshawa Museum received a donation of letters from a gentleman by the name of Warren Tate. Within this donation was a collection of letters written by William Garrow Jr., the great uncle of Mr. Tate. The collection includes over 18 letters written by William, most of them to his 2 sisters, Leah and Lillian, while he was overseas during World War I. The collection of correspondence provides a picture of what his experiences were like in the First World War, a perspective that we cannot find in textbooks. The collection also can be used to better understand the impact of war on the citizens here in Oshawa. In this talk, we're going to look at 4 very different experiences during World War I and how they impacted the local community. Today we will look at 4 different residences. We will look at what their experiences were, how the war impacted them personally, and how the war impacted them on a much larger scale. My picture showed up this time. When I talked at the Historical Society, my picture disappeared. So this is William James Garrow Jr. He was born on May 15, 1894, to William and Mary Garrow. The family lived at 245 Athol Street East here in Oshawa. William, up there in the top middle, was the youngest of 4 children. Leah, the eldest, was born in 1888. Twins, Lillian and Lorne, were born 4 years later in 1892. Sadly, Lorne passed away just 3 months after he was born. And William Jr. was born 2 years after the twins. But these are just vital statistics, and they really don't look into who William was. While the family faced a tragedy with the death of Lorne, they became a very close-knit family, and they were very active in their community. The family was especially active at Simcoe Street Methodist, now Simcoe Street United, Church here in Oshawa. Both Leah and Lillian were members of the church for decades, and all 3 children attended Sunday school at the church. At the time of the 1901 census, their father, William Sr., was working as a laborer at a carriage factory. Given the location of the family home and the location of the McLaughlin Carriage Company, which was located at the corner of Richmond and William Street, it's entirely possible that William Sr. worked for the McLaughlin Carriage Company. At this time, it would have been a brand new factory, just opened in 1900 and was considered state-of-the-art. According to William's attestation papers, which are his enlistment forms, when he signed up to serve, he was 5 foot 4.5 inches tall, had blue eyes, brown hair, a medium complexion, and a scar above his nose. Information such as this was recorded to help identify soldiers if they happened to die while overseas. At the time he was enlisted, William was working as an upholsterer, perhaps at the carriage company with his father. When he enlisted with the Canadian Expeditionary Force, William enlisted in Montreal on August 30th, 1915. At that time, he was 21 years old. He enlisted with the No. 3 McGill University, Princess Patricia's Light Infantry. This was the 3rd university company formed at McGill from students to help bolster the ranks of the Princess Pats. The first university company was formed in the spring of 1915 and consisted solely of students from the university and their friends. The Princess Pats were a privately raised regiment. There was no government provisions for reinforcements. And by 1915, the summer of, the regiment had suffered devastating losses, and there was concern that they would end up being disbanded. The university companies were a response to this need for reinforcements for the Pats. The idea was to recruit from university students and their friends. While the university companies drew from universities across Canada, the student union at McGill was the main mobilization center, and companies became known as the McGill companies. William, along with 4 other young men from Oshawa, Archie Law, Will Howden, Walter Hopeday, and Will French, all traveled to Montreal together to enlist with the Princess Pats. After enlisting in August 1915, William arrived in England by September 14th, 1915. Here, he underwent basic training at the Canadian Training School at Shorncliffe. This is where the letters home begin, and this is our very first letter that we have. It starts, "Dear folks at home." His first letter, addressed, "Dear folks at home," was written while Garrow was training at Shorncliffe. He had not yet made it to the front lines, and this letter is filled with him chatting about missing his family, being thankful that they thought to send him a local paper, and even mentioning how proud he is to be overseas and fighting for his country. Garrow notes that his family had assumed he'd already been to the front lines in France, but he hadn't yet, and he wasn't certain when that would happen. The Princess Pat. At the time that he wrote this first letter, he was a member of the No. 4 Company. They were a reserve battalion. However, soon after, he was quickly transferred to the Princess Pat's Light Infantry and found himself on the front lines. This happened very quickly because the next letter, dated January 7th, 1916, says he is, quote, somewhere in France with the Princess Pat's. Garrow's letters are, and this is him right here, handsome young man. They're an interesting combination of relaying the hardships of war while chatting happily about what life is like at home. In a letter dated May 7th, 1916, Garrow takes the time to chastise his sister about complaining that he's not writing home enough. He mentions that the mail is only sent out twice a week and he does not often write while he's in a trench. According to Garrow, more often than not, when he's in a trench, the weather is terrible, the trench is dirty and cramped, and he cannot find a good place to write. This letter, he writes that he is writing from an overcrowded dugout that, according to him, is designed to fit 2 men, but was currently housing 4. In a letter dated February 21st, 1916, William takes the time to write more in depth about what life is like in the trenches. He and his platoon were at the front lines in Belgium at this time. He writes about how close their trench was to the German trench, and that at some places just 30 yards or 27 meters apart. The letter also starts to outline the lives lost in the war. William writes about how this time at the front they engaged in a rather difficult battle with the Germans. According to William, the Germans threw everything they had at them, except for gas, and his platoon suffered quite a few casualties. He takes the time to write about one particular loss. According to William, this young man belonged to his platoon and was someone who was never seen without a smile on his face. Sadly, the young man was shot in the head while out on patrol duty on the front lines. Unfortunately, William's family received a telegram. William was at the front lines with the Princess Pat's at Sanctuary Hill, or Hill 62, during the Battle of Mount Sorel. The battle itself took place between June 2nd to 13th, 1916. It is believed that William lost his life on the very first day of this battle. The family searched for answers as to how their son and brother died. His sisters contacted a friend and fellow soldier, Lance Corporal William French, one of the young men that William traveled to Montreal to enlist with, to determine details about what happened, how their brother died. French spoke to several members of Garrow's platoon who survived and took the time to write back to the sisters. In William French's letter, dated August 7th, 1916, French goes into detail about the death of William. He had first told the family that William had been hit by a shell. However, apparently that information was incorrect. William died after being struck in the face by a bullet. He died instantly. The battle was truly a bloodbath, with Canadians having approximately 8,000 casualties. The troops faced not only massive German bombardment, but they were devastated by German mining that allowed them to detonate 4 mines under the Canadian positions. French writes about how the losses from this battle had been great. He had hoped to send Garrow's sisters his personal items, but he couldn't find a trace of them. Within this collection, we have not only the letters that William wrote home, we have all of the items that were given to the family of the official correspondence. So we have the telegram that his family was sent, informing them of their son and brother's death. We have with us also the letters that the girls sent to the government, trying to find out what happened to their brother. We have the correspondence back from the government. And we have a booklet where the sisters traveled overseas to France and Belgium after the end of the war to tour the battlefields and see where their brother died. He has no headstone in France. He's recognized on the Menin Gate. He does have a headstone here in Oshawa. So if you go to Union Cemetery, you will see a Garrow headstone, and on that is his what they call a dead man's penny. It's a plaque, a memorial plaque that was given to families who lost sons and daughters during World War I. Now we're going to look, We're going to look at someone else who served right around the same time as William. This is Albert George Dunbar Pankhurst. Albert enlisted on April 23rd, 1915. Unlike Garrow, Albert actually had some previous military experience with the 34th Ontario Regiment. Pankhurst was born here in Cedardale, just south of Oshawa, on June 21st, 1885. He was the eldest of 3 children born to Henry and Margaret Pankhurst, née Dunbar. The marriage between his parents was one that played a role in dividing the Pankhurst family. This is due, in part, to the fact that Margaret was mixed race. The family arrived in the Oshawa area in 1850, and it is noted in the census that they were black. With at least a couple of interracial marriages, Pankhurst was able to enlist with the 34th Regiment and the 28th Battalion, rather than be with the segregated No. 2 Construction Battalion with the other black men who wanted to serve in World War I. Albert enlisted in Manitoba, where he moved to after 1911 to work as a farm laborer. He enlisted with the 28th Battalion on April 23rd, and his training occurred in Manitoba. He shipped out on March 13th, 1916, and became one of the almost 100 reinforcements to that battalion that they received between March 16th and March 20th, 1916. The 28th Battalion was an infantry battalion that was formed in November 1914 in response to the declaration of war. The battalion was also known as the Northwest Battalion, as it originally recruited from Saskatoon, Regina, Moose Jaw, Prince Albert, and mobilized in Winnipeg. The 28th Battalion first arrived in England in May of 1915. At that time, the battalion joined up with the 1st Infantry Division to become the Canadian Corps. Pankhurst was part of the reinforcements that arrived in March of 1916. Both William and Albert found themselves in Belgium in June of 1916, and both were part of the Battle of Mount Sorel. While William lost his life during the battle, Albert was reported missing on June 6, 1916. This battle was, like so many of the First World War, a bloody affair. According to the battalion history, the 28th Battalion history, 2 companies, A and B, were all but wiped out, the former being victims of those German mines, while the latter came under one of the most terrific enemy bombardments of the war. The 6th, June 6th, was the blackest day in the history of the unit, and while the casualties in the ranks were exceptionally high, some of the noblest, most experienced officers were lost. The Germans attacked in overwhelming force, carried the Canadian line, and despite a most gallant and heroic resistance, during which the battalion machine gunners inflicted heavy losses, they were surrounded, overcome, and prisoners were taken. One of those prisoners was Private Albert Pankhurst. During the First World War, 132 officers, 3,715 other ranks of Canadian Expeditionary Forces were taken prisoner. At Mount Sorel, over 500 men were captured and taken prisoner. One of them was Albert. Sorry, they're backwards. At the time, he was moved from a POW camp I totally lost my notes here. I did a great deal of research into looking into what POW life was like during World War I. And Albert's records are very clear, actually, as to where he was kept. So when he was first captured, he was at the Wine Cap, W-A-N, my pronunciation of German is terrible, which was, by all accounts, a fairly decent POW camp. But by 1917, he was moved to Limburg camp. This camp was considered a very harsh camp. It was one in which the prisoners were treated poorly, they were fed poorly, and they were expected to provide labor now that the Germans were suffering heavy losses. This camp was also far enough away from any sort of borders and allied cities that they felt they didn't need as much supervision. Because of this, there were some escapes from the Limburg camp. Albert was one of those people that escaped from his POW camp. When I was doing research into the POW camps and into escapes, I came across this fantastic description. It was 2 gentlemen who were named and 2 other gentlemen who weren't. And I'm like, woohoo, maybe this is a description of Albert's escape. Maybe I've met the people who he was with. No such luck. The dates did not work out. However, it does give us a pretty good indication of what it was most likely what Albert went through. There can't be that many ways to escape from a prisoner of war camp. So what they did is they just walked off. They walked away from their work and just kept walking. And Albert just kept walking. We do know that a notation in Albert's file on March 6, 1918, notes that he had escaped. The next notation on March 18th notes that he had arrived back in England on March 14th. So we do know that he made it safely away to the point where he was honored by the King and Queen. So this is a note to him, thanking him for his resiliency in being in a prisoner of war camp for over 2 years and his bravery with escaping. And this is a note signed by the King. It is in the family's archives still, they hold on to that, but we do have a copy of it. And here's where we note that he is missing in action, and as you move through the prisoners of war camp. Now this is Albert's brother Ward. So while Albert is being held a prisoner of war, Ward found himself down in the United States when the U.S. finally became part of the war effort. Ward was one of the first wave of gentlemen to register for the conscription during World War I. So we see his draft card, and his draft card has something very interesting that would impact his service had he actually served. There's no indication that he actually went overseas. You will note under race, Ward had first filled it out as Caucasian. Somebody scratched that out and wrote above it, black. This simple moment and change on his draft card would have dramatically changed how his service went. Canada had the No. 2 Construction Battalion. The Canadian government was overwhelmed by the number of Black Canadians who wanted to enlist and wanted to serve, to the point where they formed the segregated unit, the No. 2 Construction Battalion. The United States had already had segregated units, so when they finally entered the First World War, they had 2 combat units that were segregated, as well as numerous construction units that were segregated units. So unlike Albert, who was serving in the non-segregated battalion, Ward, if he had served, would have been put into a segregated unit. This meant he would have been given lesser of everything. Segregated units were given lesser quality food, lesser quality uniforms, lesser quality everything. So his time in service would have been different than Albert's. Now, we know that they both survived World War I and returned home to Canada. Albert eventually settled in California with his wife Martha and his 3 children, and he lived there until his death in 1977. Ward remained here in Oshawa and lived in the family home with his sister Greta until his death in 1978. This family is part of a much larger research project I'm doing that is looking at early Black history in the area, and the family has a fascinating history. Now we're going to look at a more female perspective now. We've had 2 soldiers, 2 different experiences. One unfortunately died relatively quickly into his service. The other one spent 2 years in a prisoner of war camp. What was Victoria Maud Donovan's experience like? Well, Victoria Maud was born on May 7, 1882 to Donald and Sophia Spence. She came from a large family. She was 7th of 9 children, and they lived in Victoria County, which is close to Peterborough. In 1910, just prior to her marriage on June 29, 1910, to Dr. Frederick James Donovan, a name you might all be familiar with if you're from the area. He had a high school named after him. Victoria graduated from St. Luke's General Hospital in Ottawa as a nurse. On her enlistment form, or her attestation paper, she notes that she is part of an active militia. Her service file notes that her previous Corps experience was actually the nursing school at St. Luke's General Hospital. So far, Albert is our first to enlist, as he volunteered in March 1915. William was next, volunteering in August of 1915, and then Victoria. She volunteered on October 9th, 1915, to join the Canadian Army Medical Corps with her husband. Both Victoria and Frederick enlisted in London, Ontario. Victoria's attestation papers were actually signed by the matron-in-chief, Margaret C. MacDonald. And anyone who has researched nursing sister history, if you're a fangirl over this, because the matron MacDonald was a really important female who played a role in World War I. This is because MacDonald was awarded the rank of Major. She was the first woman in the British Empire to hold this rank. She was the head of the Canadian Nursing Service, and that was part of the Canadian Army Medical Corps. Canada's Army Nursing Service was created in 1901. At the time of the beginning of the First World War, they had only 80 reserved nurses prepared, but hundreds of nurses would enroll in the early days of the conflict. The first contingent of Canadian troops to leave for England in September 1914 had 101 nurses with them, led by Matron-in-Chief Margaret MacDonald. Unlike the nursing units in other Allied forces, the Canadian nurses were fully integrated within the military structure, thus assigned rank within the Army Medical Corps. Now, Victoria shipped out from Canada on October 6, 1915. She arrived in England just 1 month after William arrived. So while he was busy training in Shorncliffe, Victoria was sent directly to a hospital in Westcliff. By December 13, 1915, she was posted at the Westcliff Canadian Eye and Ear Hospital. This was considered a special hospital that focused on very specific injuries or illnesses, such as orthopedic, tubercular, eye and ear, physiotherapy, and venereal. The bed capacity varied according to the types of cases that they were looking after at the time. Victoria served all of 1916 at Westcliff before being transferred to the No. 1 Canadian General Hospital near the front lines on April 21st, 1917. The hospital was located in France. During World War I, the area where she was moved to, Etaples, became a vast military camp and then a giant hospital city. Many medical facilities were established by the Australians, the New Zealanders, and the British in this area. Wounded soldiers were consequently often sent to the area to recover or en route to Britain. The town's medical prominence did not escape the attention of the German military high command, which organized air raids on the town. 4 such attacks occurred in May. They were launched using incendiary bombs directed at the various hospital sites. Given that literally hundreds of patients were suffering from fractured femurs, many were unable to move to safety during these raids. They were thus assisted by hospital orderlies, who themselves came under machine gun fire from low-flying aircrafts. On October 24th, 1917, Victoria was awarded the Royal Red Cross for her service during these times. When Victoria came home from her time in When Victoria arrived home post-World War I, she and Frederick moved to Oshawa, where he set up a very successful doctor practice. They had 1 child together, but Victoria returned home sick. She contracted tuberculosis of the urinary tract, which ended up causing her a great deal of issues, constant infections and all of that. She had something similar and had surgery prior to going overseas, but her time in her service on the front lines made the problem much worse. When she passed away in 1930, she's considered a war dead. And this is what we see here. It was because they could directly attribute her illness and her death to her time in service. Interestingly enough, Frederick went on to marry another nursing sister that I've researched. So Frederick's second marriage was to nursing sister Evangeline Emsley. They didn't have any children, but they worked together to raise Frederick's daughter. We actually have in our collection items from Evangeline's family. I have her medals, as well as a lantern that she used when she served overseas. And here we have it listed, her as a war dead. And finally, we have Mr. George Nelson Finnegan. And George's story is dramatically different from the first three that we have looked at. George Finnegan was born in Oshawa on September 8th, 1888. George was the youngest of three boys born to Michael and Mary Finnegan. His father was a veteran of the American Civil War, born to Irish parents in Belleville, Ontario. For many years prior to the war, George's father was the proprietor of the American Hotel. In the 1901 census for Oshawa, it shows that they had some domestic help working with them, a young woman named Gladys Bishop, at their house at 142 Simcoe Street North. They were a well-to-do family. The experiences of Private Finnegan allow us to examine a very different aspect of World War I. Unlike Albert and William, George didn't willingly enlist. George was drafted under the Military Service Act in 1917. The Military Service Act allowed for conscription of Canadian men to serve. While early recruitment efforts proved extremely successful, with over 300,000 Canadian men volunteering to head overseas for the war effort, the horrors of the war and the immense cost of life meant that by the end of 1916, volunteer enlistment had all but dried up. The proposal to mandate compulsory service, which was put forth by Prime Minister Borden, divided the country. On a whole, French Canadians were absolutely against conscription, and this led to riots breaking out over the issue in Quebec. George was a Roman Catholic of Irish descent. There had been simmering issues at this time between Protestant Canadians and Canadians of the Catholic faith. In particular, the struggles with Quebec Catholics seemed to mirror those of Irish Catholics and put forth the idea that the Catholics were not good, patriotic Canadians. So George went over and served his time. He was injured briefly when he was shot in the arm. He healed up. It's really hard to see that one. And then he was back on the front lines. By the end of the war, George returned home, and he was officially discharged on April 11th, 1919. When he returned home, George moved back in with his parents. And he lived in his home that is still standing today at 142 Simcoe Street. He lived with his family and worked at various small jobs. He never married. He only left the family home in 1952 when he moved to a house just a couple doors down. He is an example, we think, of someone who struggled post-war. He came home a very different, very changed man. He remained unmarried. He died on July 13th, 1963, and is buried in St. George's Catholic Cemetery. Each of these stories focuses on very different experiences during World War I. Each of these different experiences provide us with a more complete picture of what life was like for those who went overseas during this terrible time. 2 of the people we learned about tonight died, 1 on the battlefield, 1 well after, but as a result of her service. 1 was held captive in a POW camp for 2 years and faced the terror that was internment. Finally, one did not want to take part in this at all, but was forced to due to conscription. William Garrow, along with his friend Archie Law, who he enlisted with, is one of the 138 residents honored on Oshawa's War Memorial, which is located in Memorial Park. The memorial honors all those residents who died in action during the war. But what it doesn't take into account is all those who died from their injuries, both physical and mental, after the war. Thank you very much. Do you guys have any questions? Not the happiest topic right now. Pardon me?
I think they're recognizing them a lot now in our military when they die after post-traumatic stress.
Yeah, and I think even with Victoria, the fact that she is considered a war dead, even though she died in 1930, was kind of that step in that right direction of recognizing that you may not have died on the battlefield, but you've certainly come home changed and perhaps in such a manner that, it resulted in your death. And yeah, this war is when they started to really kind of have that discussion about what war can do to the psyche. We started talking about shell shock. Whitby had a hospital specifically for soldiers returning with shell shock. And now today, eventually that became Whitby Psych, and now it's Ontario Shores. And now today we do talk much more openly about, the impact of war on the psyche. So, any other questions? Yeah.
Do you have any other collections of letters besides the ones from that?
From Garrow?
Yes.
No, I have a series of Christmas cards, I guess they are, that were sent out during World War II. I'm talking with the Pankhurst family to see if I can get his letters, because there are other letters that the family has that went before he was captured when he was writing home. So they have those, as well as the letter that he got from the king. I don't have any additional ones. I would love more, right? They're really fascinating. These ones have been fully digitized and have been fully transcribed. So there is a website, an online exhibit that I've created called Letters from the Trenches. So all of the letters are available there. So you've got all of William's letters as well as all of the official correspondence. Now the originals are on there as opposed to the transcriptions, because I like to make you all read. But I do have transcriptions available if you're looking at them and you're struggling to read them. Yeah.
Another thing, my own grandfather, but he wasn't from Oshawa, he sent home postcards from World War I, and I wonder if this was common. Just not everybody, I guess, was a writer.
Yeah.
But you could write a few words on a postcard. And
well, this is what basically those ones that I was talking about from World War II were. They are holiday cards with just enough room to write, to my love or to my, darling family, Merry Christmas, and then mailed them on. And those actually belong to Earl Han. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with who he is. He's a founding member of the Oshawa Historical Society. We actually found those through eBay. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yes, and actually I have read there are plenty of books out there written by soldiers who returned from World War I who were made prisoners of war, and actually I have a book called Prisoner 5111 that's by Harry Lade, who was also taken prisoner at Mount Sorel, and he describes his time in the trenches and in life in the prisoner of war camp and how he was transferred to Switzerland because of his poor health. Prisoners of war who were in poor health were selected by the Germans and sent to either Switzerland or the Netherlands because of their ill health, because those were neutral countries.
It's really interesting, like I said, when I came across that account of escaping from the Limburg one, I'm like, how many people could escape from it? Well, apparently 2 sets of people did, just because the dates don't match up. But it's a really interesting discussion about how they went about doing it. And like I said, I think it's pretty applicable to Albert's case too. There can't be that many different ways to escape from a POW camp. But when he finally did escape, things were very bad in the camp. The Germans were very much losing the war at the time. The prisoners were getting very little food. One account from someone who was in the camp at the same time Albert was is that the night before, the mystery meat they ate was dachshund, Yeah, so I would think that would be a little mealy, but what do I know? I've never eaten Dachshund. But yeah, so it's discussing the fact that they are, at this point by 1918, very poorly fed, struggling to survive, and still being made to do the manual labor because the German military-industrial complex was falling apart, right? They didn't have people to man the industries because the men were being sent to the front lines. So they were using the prisoners of war to do so. And Albert just decided he'd had enough, and off he went.
Now, when it comes to the attestation papers, do they report on the injuries? The doctors do inspect them when they're injured and when they're in the hospital and make out reports and show where the wounds are.
Yeah, oh yeah, the files are phenomenal. You kind of feel bad because I've been researching this one Oshawa resident who had some issues in the nether regions that I know way too much about because I read through his entire medical records, so I'm kind of like, sorry about that, sir. But yeah, they really do get into what their life was like. And these are only a fraction of the records that were created. Unfortunately, Library and Archives Canada had to make a decision because they had mountains and mountains and mountains of records related to the First World War when the Second World War began. And they had to decide what do we keep and what don't we, because they knew there was going to be mountains and mountains and mountains of records coming out of World War II. So they only kept small files. They kept files on every soldier, but they're not as thick as maybe you would think they would be, simply because they had to make a decision for space.
Some of those people must have gotten pensions, and that would be in their records as well?
No, not that I've seen. Yeah.
I had 5 uncles in the First World War, and I have a booklet that my son got from Ottawa on each of them, and it is a booklet.
Yeah.
Like it was their weight, their height, their dental records, every injury they had, and 2 of them had the same problem, but they were young men.
Yeah, the nether region issues,
You know,
yeah. No, and basically you can track where they were because they, let's see, cool. Like here, you can see embarked Canada, disembarked England. What's one of the better ones? Oh. And this one, it's telling you literally every step they took. And a lot of them, like I was able to learn more about the 28th Battalion because they have their war diaries available. So they track everything they did. So you can look it up. And I told this story last time. I've been researching multiple soldiers during World War I who served. I mean, their attestation papers are all available online, right? So you're able to pull them, look at all their records. So I was researching a gentleman whose picture I am hanging in the archives. It's a very lovely picture. His name is Philip Phillips and his wife Emily Phillips. They're beautiful oval-shaped frames, the convex glass, gorgeous. Like, I'd like to learn more about this man. So he served in World War I. Great. He served at Vimy Ridge. I'm like, oh man, so I'm able to trace everything. Survived Vimy Ridge. Yay. You know, you get a little attached when you get researching, right? So I was like, so excited, woohoo, survives from Vimy Ridge. And then I keep going through his service record. So he survives, he was injured, got back to got all healed up. A month later, went back out, died the first day he got back out on the front lines. So that really took the wind out of my sails. I'm like, yay, you survived Vimy Ridge, only to die a month later in the battle that nobody pays any attention to, right? So the service records that are available through Library and Archives Canada are phenomenal. And you're going to see more and more of that related to the Second World War ones as well, right? My great-uncle's file is there because he was killed overseas during World War II, so I was able to dig through his stuff and really learn a lot more. Yep.
Sometimes there's extraneous material as well. You ask, does it have anything after? And my great-grandfather's has a notation that he died in 1953.
Yeah.
And that's where, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's,
Notation.
Like this is in Victoria's file.
Yeah.
It notes that she died, the date she died, that she's considered a war dead because they have this record. So she's a casualty.
Yeah.
Where she died, what she died of.
Maybe in relation to pensions too.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
and that's it. There is, like their payroll records are there. So you can see that they were paid, and you saw how much they were paid, which nothing. But yeah,
Well,
so you're able to chase all
He was a caretaker at
those.
the armories after, he was a caretaker after the armories in later years, but it doesn't mention any of that in the paperwork.
Yeah.
Okay, but maybe due to that, it was noted, I don't know.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I haven't got a question, but I have a card that was sent to my aunt, who was born in 1899. Take my word for it, it says inside under the lacy bit, from France.
Oh, very cool.
And I will pass it. Please don't take it out.
And what is interesting with the letters is, you know, the first one he tells us where he is. And the minute he's on the front line, suddenly he's somewhere in France. He's somewhere in Belgium. And I use that with the high school students to discuss, you know, censorship and why you can't tell them exactly where he is located in France. Because kids are like, where is he in France? I'm like, well, you don't want to just hand the Germans where you're located, right? So you gotta, somewhere. Yep.
I just comment that in the battalion records, you will sometimes find names of individual soldiers who get commended by their officer or their commander who's writing the reports.
Yeah, Evangeline Emsley, who was one of the other nursing sisters who married Dr. Donovan after Victoria died, is actually mentioned in a dispatch. And we have that mentioned in a dispatch, which is really cool. Any other questions? If not, thank you so much for having me out tonight.
And we at the branch really appreciate you coming out to talk to us.
Anytime.
That was really good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gotta grab my
And I'll
stick.
just say in my grandfather's file from World War I, he apparently had a lot of dental work done after the war, and it's all documented there because I believe it was paid for by the military. But his death date is not there. So I think it's hit and miss whether somebody actually may be informed, the government, as to a death date. But certainly, you know, anything civilian would not be mentioned.
Where are these records?
They're on Library and Archives Canada website, and it's under Canadian CEF, Canadian Expeditionary Force Records. And you can search by name or by service number if they have.
If you have a John Smith, it's a lot easier to search by regimental number.
Yeah.
Otherwise, like, not the right one, not the right one.
And you can search, as you're bringing them up, you'll see their birth dates. So that'll help you as well. And the officers don't have regimental numbers. Okay, so if you knew they were an officer, you put in their rank and see what would come up. Yeah.
Or like the grandfather got who today?
I had one guy who I was researching, I don't know what he did, but he got into trouble for mischief with an outhouse. So, yeah.
I can just imagine.
The officer was in it at the time.
That's possible, yeah.
I was about to say that. Okay, we'll break now for 15 or 20 minutes and reconvene after that. Thank you.
You know, this postcard I'm holding up,
Well, this one wasn't completed out. He just went to trial. Got in trouble.
Oh, they just had him going around and recruiting in military bands and to pay
where did it not go yet?
Library and Archives.
They were made by the ladies in Belgium, they would sew
He
those.
used to send them home.
That I heard anyways, my grandpa had one.
Yeah.
And say, I know this
Yes. Because that's what kind of budget.
That's why I do it.
And first up, I'll ask Sheila to come up and give us the treasurer's report.
Okay, for our current account, our balance, I think it's the same as last month, $2,626.73. We have $750, 2 rent checks that still haven't been deposited, so our bet, it should be $1876, around there anyways. But we have also due from OGS a total of $2,033. We have a little bit from the e-store. Membership fees are $1,991, and donations $40.75.
And Dee, do we have any correspondence?
Lots, way too much.
Okay.
All by email though,
That's okay.
and some of them are really large. Yes, I know, but I'm just gonna give you names.
Highlights here.
And highlights, yeah. Do I need to talk on that? Okay. Oops, it's.
Yeah, it's right there.
Okay, is that good? Okay, can you hear me, guys? Yeah. Okay, the first one came in January 4th, and it's from Michael Ewing. He's looking at Samuel Moore, so the name Moore, and he goes through that because he wants to know what William Fitch Moore's first wife was, the mother of Samuel. His second one is Asa Curtis and Rachel Baden. Okay, those are the names, because it's a really long email. So if you need that one, or have those names, or want to know about those names, then come and see me. It's January 4th. The next one came from Fred Blair on January 4th, and we're researching a number of War 1812 veterans. He does not name any of them.
Just to let everybody know, we're going to get an article from him about researching.
Yeah, there's a lot of names there. I mean, we're talking pages, and pages, and more pages, and more pages. I'm not sure how many.
I think Steve said that's going to be published in the newsletter.
Yeah, that's what he said, yeah. The next one is January 4th, and it's from Wesley Johnson. He is looking at his ancestor, Sarah, wife of Henry Butson, born 1835, probably near Kingston, married in 1852, Victoria County. Unfortunately, her family lived in Reach Township, which means their population schedule did not survive. He has some land records and some information on his great-great-grandfather, George Henry Johnson, born at Balsam. Saturday, January 4th, again, Susan Clausen. It's concerning Milton Robert Whitlow, W-H-I-T-L-O. She's looked up on Ancestry and says a lot of things about her great-great-grandfather, his sons being also a Samuel Bain, same as the one, the first one. Bain is a Scottish name, not an Irish name. And she had some pictures too. And a whole family tree on it. The next one came in January 31st for Sean, his name was Sean Hobson. He found a grave marker in the Canadian Gen Web for John Bell and his wife Margaret Miller. It's shared with her husband's Anne Grierson, the wife of William Bell. She's found the death registration for John Bell and indicates he was born in Dumfriesshire, Scotland, the same area of birth for William and Anne Grierson Bell. So she's still looking for information on Anne Grierson, John Bell, and his wife Margaret Miller. The next one came in on the 29th of January from Heather Michael, M-E-I-K-L-E, Michael. When she came to Canada as a young child, she was 3, she was boarded on a farm in Durham. From what I remember, I thought the lady's name was Mrs. Brush, or it might be Bush, and she's looking for information about that. In later life, when I married my husband, he had an uncle Ed and an aunt Joan Kierstead from Durham, as well as Paul and Irma Wright. The next one came in January 24th from Kimberly Marvin. I've been researching part of my family. Sydney Shaver married Deborah Wilson October 13th, 1839 in Darlington, Newcastle District. The marriage was performed by James Bradshaw of the Methodist Episcopal Church in Upper Canada. The witnesses were William and Munson. Deborah's parents were Huron Wilson and Anne Marie Munson. I believe Sydney was born around 1818 in New York, and Deborah was born in Canada around 1820. Looking for information on them. And that's it. Any information you need? Ooh, can't see. Then come and see me at the break or afterwards.
I'll just mention that last one. Turned out the name is actually Hewson Wilson.
Hewson?
She didn't get the letter quite right. And it actually ties in with 2 other people that are researching that family. James Hamilton Wilson, who settled in Darlington Township early on, and his wife, Deborah. We think the last name might be Bennett. But if anybody's interested in those names, they link in back with that family.
Okay. Now, our March meeting is going to feature Dr. Amy Barron from the Clarington Museums. Now, Dr. Barron is an archaeologist. That's what her doctorate is in. And she wants to talk about research that she did into an Indigenous woman, which is very difficult to do. So she's very pleased to be able to show the story of Susan Nawagashkoki. Who knows if I'm even close? Goose Boland and the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nations. And some of the information she found was in one of Catherine Trail's books, apparently. But she had several sources for information for this woman, which was just incredible. And I will be doing the April meeting talking about DNA tools for the next steps. Our DNA Special Interest Group meets the 3rd Wednesday of every month, and so our next meeting is February 19th at 7 p.m. That's a Wednesday night, and it's up in our office on the, I call it the 3rd floor, with this half-step stuff. It's probably 5th, but I won't say that because then you think you'll have to climb too far.
Up in the rafters.
Yeah. So at this point, is there anyone here in the audience who has a brick wall or is a little bit stymied on what to do next for a particular research problem? We will entertain it now and put the minds of everybody here on that problem. If not, you're going to get a live show of some of the OGS website if you want. Anne.
I just mentioned something. I've mentioned this before, but I've had it may be a problem with no solution. So my husband Dan here has a great-great-grandfather who was one of triplets that were born in Pontypool, and I presume they're born in Pontypool, although the records say they're born, later records say that they were born in Pontypool. But we can't find any close to the date information about the birth of those triplets. And you would think that would be an interesting thing that would happen if triplets were born, but it was a little village with not very much infrastructure at the time. In 1864.
That was my question. 1864.
And we haven't, you know, we've looked around to try to find church records. We've looked in the old newspaper records, although the family wouldn't have had any money to be placing birth announcements, but we thought it might have got in the paper just out of general interest. But so we haven't got any birth or baptism or anything, information for any of those triplets, and yet they all, you know, lived, grew up in the area, and had lives, and got married and children, and so.
What about later years when they got married? Would they have been in the paper then and have it noted as being triplets?
Yes, well, there is information, like we have found sources.
The only one is that family Bible, isn't it, with the picture of the three of them when they were little babies?
So we found a family Bible, but the family Bible, it didn't say on there that they were born in Pontypool, in that. But
and we don't
picture
have the
was
Bible
in there.
either.
But the picture was in there of the triplets, but it wasn't. No one had noted down that they were born in Pontypool. But later on, yes, when they were adults, and when they were asked where they were born, or his great grandfather said he was born in Pontypool. Of course, he doesn't remember that.
No. One assumes that he was told it, but
yes,
was he really? You know, they may have moved to Pontypool shortly after they were born, and they could even just think they'd always lived there.
Yes.
Yes.
So it would be nice to find some kind of record, but I mean, I've been keeping an eye open and looking for quite a long time, and I don't know where else I could look.
What religion was the family?
I don't.
Methodist?
Probably,
but at the time, there's no record of them belonging to any church at that time. But when they're adults, they were Methodist.
And you checked out the Durham County Methodist baptisms that were published.
Yes.
It was a while ago.
Yes.
Probably 10 or 15 years ago now.
Yes.
Can you check the
Bob.
What about, and I don't know whether there's any records, the Orange. I have relatives from Pontypool as well, and I know some of them belong to the Orange Lodge. Now, is there any Orange records?
Well, I haven't looked for that, but
I know I know there was a notation. I was told that my great whatever was very strong with the Orange, and the Orange was quite strong there.
They weren't Irish.
But if everybody else is, are you Irish or are you one of those heathens?
Yes.
You might decide you're Orange.
Just as a matter of interest, my grandfather, I don't know if he said it, but everybody around him said he was born in Pontypool. He wasn't. So, you might want to try Tyrone, which is where my grandfather was actually born.
Yes.
Yeah, or anywhere in the country.
Well, the thing is, even the civil registration, which started 4 or 5 years after they were born, they don't really even specify where. They'll say a township at the top.
Yes.
But they don't always specify where in that township somebody was born. So at the very least, you can put the township because it's going to be close. You put probably.
Well, I've got
that may be all you can do is say probably.
Yes.
Anyway, any other suggestions?
There's a lot of area out there that had their own small churches at the time. They may not have lived directly in Pontypool. There's several different little communities around the area that have had churches, and they've all been gone by now.
Yes.
So maybe
There
other
was one that
records
was
of
on the Durham 20 and 35 there that had a small cemetery, a small church.
Well, yeah, we have checked any cemetery records that are
been in the Lindsay Library?
Yeah.
The Lindsay Library does have a good research room.
Yeah.
I've been there, but it was a long time ago, and I can't remember what I looked at.
Yeah. Have you talked to Lois McGahey?
No.
Because remember, now you can check upstairs, she did all those indexes from all the newspapers all around that area.
Around Pontypool?
I think down into Pontypool, Victoria.
It's not in Victoria County.
That was Peterborough Township? Peterborough Township?
Yeah, Durham, Northumberland.
Durham.
Be Durham County, but it's no longer our Durham.
Because mine came from Cavan.
It
So
would
I went to
become
Milford
more
to
likely
research.
Cavan,
Yeah.
Port Hope, that area.
Most townships switched got moved from one county to the other.
Yes.
Yeah, and don't trust even if, my great-grandmother was born in 1890s in Burton, which is one stop back on the railway.
Yes.
And so people traveled the railway more than they did east and north-south, so
yes,
it could be further along. And her official certificate says from the registrar signed that she was born in Darlington Township, Ontario County. Which, so you never know where it could be filed, like,
yes.
And who would like
Yeah,
think?
Darlington is firm, as I'm aware, that has never been in
No,
Ontario.
never has. And this is the registrar's actual.
So who was probably in Toronto?
The family didn't ever own any land. Sometimes it's often difficult to find where they were, but then every now and then you would see a record and you'd know they hadn't left.
Was there nothing on the census records to indicate their ages and triplets? For like 1871 or whatever?
Oh, we know the ages, yes.
Yes.
What was the surname?
DeLong.
DeLong?
Yeah, so you're just looking for the smoking gun that says Pontypool.
I would just like to, I would just like to have some kind of, it would be nice to have a birth record or baptism, one or the other, you know, like it's all very well for somebody on the census to say, yes, my kid's 4, okay, but, you know.
But now, what was in the family Bible? Just the photo, or did they actually put
The family
birthday?
Bible went down another line, and so it has information about their older brother.
But not.
And it just had pictures of them.
Oh, okay.
In later years, and I don't know when it started, but there was quite a Jewish community in Pontypool, and they used to travel from Toronto back and forth, and there was a summer camp out there. You never know how did that originally start, and maybe there was some travel even from Toronto, and somebody was sort of sent out there. And
that was long after my relatives were in that area.
Yeah, but maybe there was like some early relatives.
We did go to the reunion of those people and have a chat with whoever showed up.
Oh, yes.
And the historian who wrote the book, which I don't remember his name.
Was there a book on it?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's quite interesting.
Oh.
But no, Dan's family came up from the States and settled right away in the township, Clark Township.
Clark Township and
Clark
North.
Township and North, and yeah, they weren't really nothing to do with Toronto at all. So.
No, but I remember my grandmother saying that her mother hardly ever left Burton in her life, but she was actually to Toronto more often than she was to Oshawa. Because
Yes,
Toronto,
because it was a direct.
It was direct on the railway. My grandfather great grandfather worked for the railway, so it was free for her to go in, an easy connection. Whereas Oshawa or Bowmanville was hard for her to get to.
Yeah, and that is one route to look, but when did the railway start? Because we're talking 1864.
It was around that time, I think, but I'm not sure when.
1884
or something. Oh, 84?
I was going to say 1885.
Yeah, so I'm not sure the
Yeah, that was
railway
probably
is
too-
impact on this particular.
Because by that time they would have been in Bethany.
Yeah,
So,
okay, too late.
Missed
Oh, can I make another announcement after?
All right, Steve, any thoughts from any of our materials upstairs?
Other than the complete Wesleyan Methodist baptismal register is published online, indexed, and plus the original records. There's a link to the original document So that in case they were just over the border, say into Victoria County or something like that when they were born, you
Yes.
could check that out. I cannot remember the gentleman's name that has it, but he kind of linked to, I think, Mary Crandall's original Wesleyan Methodist index.
Bill
and
Martin's-
took it from there.
Bill Martin's online website.
That's where Mary Crandall's stuff was. This gentleman, I think, has his own website. His name begins with a V, but I can't.
I'll find that on the internet.
Yeah, person starting with a B who had, Google's good, but I'm not sure.
I
it's
might
quite
send you an email.
But a Wesleyan Methodist baptismal register.
Yes.
And then see the hits that come up. Put that in quotes.
Okay. Yeah.
And
Oh, that's
just in
certainly
case they
worth
were
a try.
across the border.
Yeah.
We do have a few church records up there for the Pontypool area. I can't remember if I checked them, they might be later than what you're looking for.
Well,
and if for some reason they were put into the Anglican register in Ada in Cavan Township, then those records have been copied by the Kawartha branch and are in their library up there.
That's
So you
true.
can look for baptisms there. They definitely start in the 1820s or so and go up from there. So it definitely covers the time period.
Okay.
As an interesting aside, we followed the two boys, and well, I'm from the one that went to Peterborough eventually, and Alfred DeLong, and he died behind the plow when he was 65, doing spring plowing that he wasn't supposed to do. But his brother Albert died almost the same time.
The same year of the same cause.
And they were both 65 years old.
Both from heart failure.
It can get a little freaky, can't it?
Yeah. The girl, we don't know a lot about her, she went to the States, married.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I make another announcement too when you go?
Oh, Bob.
Oh, on Family Day, I'm running an event, or among others, at Simcoe Street United Church. And it's to encourage people to get involved in hobbies and things like that. Geological Society is welcome to run a table, but we haven't been able to find a volunteer. But anybody's welcome to stop in. I'll put out some brochures for the group there. And we'll be running, what would you call it, a seminar?
Well, sort of an all-day how-to.
An all-day how-to on Wikipedia.
A drop-in.
And how to edit Wikipedia. So everybody's welcome. It's a no-charge event, no charge for the vendors, no charge for participants. From 9 till 4:30 on Family Day, which is Monday, February 17th.
Yeah.
Yep. And so anybody's welcome to drop in.
Yeah, so if you have historical topics that you see on Wikipedia and you know more about them than the article, then, find out how you can improve information on Wikipedia.
Anybody can be
What is your
an editor.
title, Ann? You are an editor?
Administrator.
Administrator, yeah, on Wikipedia.
That means I can delete the articles if I want. Of course, if I went around deleting them randomly, they'd soon take away my...
Editing rights.
No, the important takeaway is anybody can edit Wikipedia,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Yes.
But your edits don't stick unless you do it in a way that's encyclopedic. Like if you just go in there and write, "My girlfriend is pretty," pretty soon someone takes that off.
Yeah, okay.
Unless you're President Trump.
Excuse me.
Okay, he can probably hear you. So, we're, okay. So,
It's VH.
you go under education. Let's see what else on the front page before I start wrecking it. So there's the February webinar too, so that you could just click on that and sign up for it as well. The conference and they're calling it Conference and Family History Show this year. So, same thing. If you're a member, you can get the November's Families, the journal.
And I wrote a letter to the editor.
Okay, so under education, there's a spot called Webinars 2020. So if you click on that, it'll bring up the different webinars. And at the bottom here, you just click on that to register. You don't have to be a member. I believe the recording is only available to members. So if you were to go, you'd have to log in up in the corner there. And then you go to the recordings here. Let's see what happens if you're not logged in.
That German one looks pretty interesting.
Members, you have to be a member to get into the recording. But if you can watch it live without being a member. So they've got some good topics. Oops, went too far. Got any Eastern European?
Yep.
You want March then? Because we're going to talk about German and Polish archives. Archives of Ontario collections and how to use them. So that's going to be a good review and might actually get you going to visit the archives up on the University, York University campus.
Can I just make an additional comment on the
Sure.
Ontario Archive? Recently, I took a trip on the GO train and subway from Oshawa and got off the subway right at the archives in New York. And the subway station is right across the road from the archives now.
Wow.
And
How long did it take?
Took me about an hour and 45 minutes.
Yeah.
But it only cost me, seniors on the GO train is $12 to Union, and the TTC fare is $2.
Yeah.
Roughly.
That's senior price, right?
$2 senior price.
Yeah.
And there's
$3.25 if
and
you're
then there's always, there's a stop on the new subway extension at DuPont, which is about a block walk to the Toronto archives.
Okay.
Public archives, which I stopped at as well to hear a history lesson.
Yes.
At the same
Okay.
time they did it.
Well, it used to be that you could go to Brooklyn and park in the Brooklyn Arena parking lot, and there was a GO bus that would go along the 407.
Yeah.
And it was actually pretty quick. It wasn't bad at all, coming from Bowmanville, et cetera, et cetera. Well, they've changed the bus routes, so I'm not sure how you would do it now. I'm not even sure you can.
It's not really that fast if the traffic's good, but if you were taking the
Yes.
trying to take the 401 and Keele Street,
Yeah.
you might be making it faster on the train and the subway.
Well, this was because they used the 407.
Yeah.
It was going like from Durham College and making stops in Brooklyn and then 407 and then to the York University, and it was fairly quick that way. Only I haven't been for quite a while, and now things are totally
I
different.
did the 407 recently as well to York.
Well, that is not any senior
Yeah, but the
price to it.
407 doesn't have a seniors.
No.
Cost me
What if you're driving an old car?
$71 to go to Hamilton.
Doesn't matter.
No.
Nancy, can I say something about your
Sure.
newsletter?
Go ahead.
So for the last several meetings, when people have been making presentations, I noticed that a number of our members have been speaking up and telling us some interesting tidbits from their own families. Remember that you could write up something for our branch newsletter and send it in, and we would publish it for everybody to read. Anything up to about 2 pages, but it could be just a little one if you got an interesting postcard from World War I or something and you just want to say where it came from and scan it or whatever, it could be any topic really related to family, so.
And local history.
And local history. Yeah, so.
Okay, I'm gonna just take 1 second here as well. I've signed into the website. I just want to show you the members corner with all the advantages for being a member. Of course, you've all re-signed up, right?
Sure.
Okay, so.
So under resources, there's a spot called Members Corner, and this is where items show up that you get as a benefit for being a member. And it seems to have quit at point number 3, because I tell you right now, it's much longer than that with the benefits that you can get as a member. So yes, it's definitely slow. I do know that there is, I believe, the Comfort Inn group of hotels. There's a discount for OGS members at them. There is a discount for the MyHeritage Archives, a data disk that you can get for $15 as a member. Instead of having to subscribe to the whole site, you can get the records for quite a good price. And I forget what else is there. Unfortunately, it's not showing up for me.
So the insurance papers database, though, that's be quite interesting.
It is. Where's that showing?
On the,
over there.
on the left.
Yeah. Now, I was on the board when we were dealing with that. It's the International Order of Foresters. And they ran an insurance program. So, and they sold insurance, and they have all the application forms. They've scanned them, and you can order photocopies of them. The database itself is just the applicant's name, and when it was insurance for health, you know. So you won't get necessarily like the parents' names, but you'll get the parents' health conditions, and you'll know like how many kids the person had. I forget what else was on there.
Their occupation, maybe?
You'll get the date of birth. So that's what the database will give you, just the bare bones, where they lived. I believe it was Canada-wide, although most of the applications were in Ontario. And the policy number. Some of them have been scanned.
It says 50%. I wonder if it's alphabetical.
Okay. Well, how can you search?
I think it's the numbers on the right there at the top, if you scroll down a bit.
There is what's included in the policy itself. It's a 4-page, and they're saying 8.5 by 11, but I've actually seen it. They were bound in books, and some of the bottoms of the application forms have actually been cut off to make them fit into those books, unfortunately. The actual form itself was a little bit bigger than 8.5 by 11.
Do you know what date range?
It said,
Up till 1929.
It said 1875 to 1929.
Okay, so that's how you search.
Look, it's one of your.
Underneath that heading that said last name, I clicked underneath it and just typed in a last name.
Abraham Lincoln Gould. Was that American? No.
UEL.
Well, there's a heck of a lot of kids even in Canada were called George Washington. And Benjamin Franklin.
Abraham Trump.
Well, there's someplace I haven't looked.
Yeah.
1875, though.
Oh, yeah, but parents.
Were these people that were members of the IOOF?
I don't believe so.
They were people that
were purchasing the insurance.
Purchasing insurance.
But why would you buy insurance from the foresters if you weren't a forester?
No, it's the Odd Fellows.
It's the Odd.
Oh, Odd Fellows.
Yeah. Because they're an insurance company?
That was the International, it could be Odd Fellows, you're right.
Well, I just saw a photo online of the Rebecca group of the
It says Odd
IOOF.
Fellows.
Says it right there,
Yeah, my bad.
Independent order of Odd Fellows.
Is Rebecca the female wing then of the same thing?
I think so.
I think so.
Rebecca Lodge? Because
Yes.
this 1960 picture was showing all these women in a huge room in Toronto gathering for an annual get-together, I guess.
If that's the case, can you look up Page, P-A-G-E?
But all these service clubs seem to have a social aspect to them too, right? As well as like is insurance and a service club.
So thinking.
Yeah. So the service club, they have a lot of members.
Isn't that interesting? You get anything that has Page in it.
What about Dobson? My dad was.
Remember that you can, if you're a member, you can go home and look at these.
Okay.
Look it up, how guess.
What's the first name?
Try Aaron, A-A-R-O-N.
No, this is alphabetical here.
Can you scan over to see if those ones have the little PDF link?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And they do. I was wondering if they were doing it alphabetically, but if they had 50% and they're doing it alphabetically, they probably wouldn't have got up to the P's yet. So they must have some other way. Maybe it's by date.
Are those free? to
Location,
download?
maybe.
They're not charging for those PDFs?
Not these PDF ones, no. If you come up with
It's a
a
member
one
benefit.
that's not got a downloadable PDF, you can write and talk to the head office. There's a phone number on the OGS website that's a 1-800 type number, so you don't even have to pay to phone the office, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5.
It's used in Canada.
So you
There's Quebec.
You need to be a member or have a friend who's a member.
No, I think this is out in the main. Well, no,
It's
it's
an
a
open
It's a
member.
members area.
Maybe the index itself is out in the main area as well.
I think it was at one point, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, it was, but that was before they did any scanning, so I think they were charging like $10 a name or something for the photocopy. But if they got it scanned, it's not costing them any time or Money. Okay, what was the other?
Dobson.
Dawson or Dob?
D-O-B-S-O-N.
And this will be the last one, guys. Thank you.
I knew a Bob Dobson from Peterborough.
Yeah, he was my cousin.
Oh, okay. He lived on Bonnecourt Street.
Okay, right.
Well, he
Look at all the
did.
Dobsons.
Peterborough.
Yeah. He was a teacher.
Yes.
Bob Dodson.
Frederick.
So this looks like a worthwhile
Frederick
place
Perry
to-
from Alberta?
No, he was Peterborough, Ontario.
I don't see Peterborough.
No.
Shit, not Alberta.
Millbank?
I see no.
That sounds cool.
Well, he taught in Ottawa.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, that's not Millbrook.
No, that's right.
Okay.
Is that the penitentiary?
He was a good friend of Ted Barrett.
Okay, 50-50 draw.
Nancy, can I just mention, I believe Legacy has a free webinar tomorrow night on something on DNA. I can't remember the exact topic. but if
It's
anybody's
tomorrow
interested-
afternoon,
Tomorrow afternoon?
2 o'clock.
Okay. But you can always watch it afterwards for the next week for free.
Legacy,
so-
Family Tree, actually, forget the legacy part. FamilyTreeWebinars.com.
If anybody's interested in DNA, we want to check it tomorrow.
We have a prize of $18.50.
Don't ask me, last time the person who drew won, didn't they? Who was that?
We all want to draw that.
Does it count if you get it wrong?
It counted last week, or last month. Last three numbers are 598.
Not me.
We have a winner.
Good for you.
Close enough. Wow.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I got mine too. No, I got mine.
There's the one for tomorrow at 2 o'clock. It's free to register, free to watch, but even the recording's free probably till about Monday. Okay?
And there's also a 24-hour
marathon.
marathon of
Yes.
webinars. I don't know when it is.
I think it's over that family day.
Yeah, probably.
It's mentioned in the e-newsletter.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you haven't signed up for OGS's e-news, newsleaf, I think it's called e-newsleaf, somewhere on the front page, I believe you can. Put in your email address and you'll get, every Saturday morning, you'll get basically a newsletter from OGS with all sorts of bits and pieces of news across the genealogy community.
You have to be a member.
No, I don't think so. They want you to be a member, but you don't have to.
What were the people you were Virgin Leaf?
Family Tree Webinars.